Good morning, students. Today we will discuss a new portions of Sale of Goods Act, that is the transfer of ownership in case of contract of sales. When we talk about transfer of ownership, there are two words that is important. Number one is possession, number two is ownership. So when we talk about possession, the mere possession of goods will not give the right to ownership to the other person. Say in case of contract of sales, say when we just or mere transfer the ownership to a third person or to the other counterparty will not transfer the ownership. So the possession is different and ownership is different. So to get the ownership, the person should have a significant control over the product or goods. He should have significant control over the goods, and he should have the possession of the goods also sometime. It depends. He should have the control over the goods. That is important. So we should not confuse with the possessions and ownership. So what is ownership? You should have a control over the goods. Now, when we pass the ownership, there are certain obligation, right and obligation from the point of the seller and the buyer. Number one, the risk of loss only by the owner. So the question is, who is the owner? The risk of loss will be transferred only to the owner. Say sometime if ownership would not be passed by the seller to the buyer, he would have transferred the possession, but the seller would have kept the ownership. In that case, the risk is vested with the seller. If suppose the seller passed the ownership to the buyer, then the buyer should bear the losses. So the loss should be borne by the owner, either it is seller or the buyer. Number two, only owner can sue. That is important. Say in case of damages or in case of loss happen, owner can sue for damages or prices. But in case of price not paid by the buyer, the seller can sue for the price. Who can sue for the price? Buyer cannot sue because buyer is a buyer of goods. So he has to pay. It is his obligation to pay the price. So he has to pay the price. So if he make a default in payment, the seller can sue for the price. So that's about ownership. Now, there are certain rules we need to follow while transferring the ownership. Say there are different situations. Actually, there are different situations where we can transfer. When we transfer the ownership and the possession, there may arise the different situations. So let us check out the legal rules regarding the transfer of ownership when different situation arises. Okay. Number one, passing of ownership in case of ascertained goods or specific goods. Yesterday we have very clearly explained what is ascertained goods and what is specific goods. So specific goods, ascertained goods, unascertained goods. So in case of a specific goods or ascertained goods, which is ascertained and which is separated from the main or bulk of goods, that is very clearly ascertained. The seller, when the seller is ready to buy the goods, it is ascertained. Say when you go for buying a car and the car is there in the showroom and they're showing that this is the car, that is an ascertained and specific goods. Now when the goods are in a deliverable stage, when this ownership is transferred is a question. When the goods are in a deliverable stage, when the goods are delivered to the buyer, when the goods are delivered to the buyer, the ownership is transferred. Number 2, when the goods are not in deliverable stage and the seller has to do something to make these goods deliverable. I'm very clear. When the goods are not in a deliverable stage and seller has to do something to make it deliverable stage, then unless otherwise the seller do something to make the goods in a deliverable stage, the ownership will not transfer. Say sometime packing, say seller has to do the packing process, then only suppose the delivery is possible, then the owner have to pack the goods. Then or there may be painting, seller has to do the painting process, then only after selling do the painting process, the ownership will be transferred. Number 3rd situation, when the goods are to be measured and weighed. When a goods are measured and to be weighted. For example, if the seller has to measure the goods and weight it in front of the buyer, and that must be identified by the buyer also. So seller has to, if weighting or measuring is not done, the delivery of goods will happen only after the measurement of the goods and weighting of the goods. Say a person is going to buy 1 kg of rice. So he's say that 1 kg of rice, the ownership of that particular 1 kg of rice will transfer only you pay the price and measure the goods and get it back. That is the point. Then when the goods are delivered on sales and return basis or approval basis, that is also important. Say suppose some transactions will be like that. Say sale and return. If you are not satisfied with the goods, you can return it back. So when this conditions happens, the delivery of goods happens, the ownership will be transferred only on the approval of the buyer who has purchased the goods. Say sale and return. Suppose if the goods are not returned, it should be returned in the reasonable time, and it should be approved by the buyer because there is a chance of return back the goods. So possession of the goods will be transferred. Maybe possession will be transferred, but ownership will be transferred only on the approval of the buyer. Okay. So in case of such conditions, sales and return or approval basis, only with the approval of the seller, the goods are owned by the buyer should give approval to the seller, then only the ownership will be transferred. Now, the second situation, passing of ownership in unascertained goods. Unascertained goods, this is a very complicated question actually. When will ownership will be transferred in unascertained goods? The answer is, the ownership of unascertained goods will be possible or transferred only when the goods make ascertained. The owner should make the goods ascertained and separate from the total goods. The owner should separate the goods from the total goods and make it possible to delivery. Then only the unascertained goods ownership will be transferred. For example, an agriculturist or a cultivator, he is selling rice, suppose, and there are suppose 1 or 100 tons of rice he has, and that is full kept in a bulk area, or it's in a godown, not sacked or something like that. It's not packed or sacked. So what happened? One person is coming and asking for 1 bag of rice. So here it is an unascertained goods, or it's also maybe sometime in a future goods also. Unascertained or a future goods. Suppose you are giving an order for a car in a showroom. So it is an unascertained goods. Say what they do is they'll take an order. Later they deliver after maybe 1 month, or they will call you and give you. So in that case, your car should be manufactured and should be in a position to deliver. Otherwise, the ownership will not be transferred. So there is a sayings in Sale of Goods Act is the risk prima facie passes with the ownership. The risk of loss will be risk prima facie pass with ownership. When the question is here, the question is when will the risk of loss passes to the other party? Say the risk of loss will pass only with the ownership. You pass your ownership to the person along with the risk of loss. Both will move or transfer parallelly. So when you transfer a goods, you are not just transferring the goods. That is the funny thing. You just transfer goods along with the risk of loss. That is the point. Risk prima facie pass with ownership. But there may be some exceptional cases say in the contract itself, you would have mentioned when the risk will be passed or when the risk is passed, then the risk will be passed. Suppose you would have transferred the ownership, but in the contract you would have, if it is mentioned that the risk will pass only after maybe 6 months or 8 months, then the risk will be passed only after 8 months. It will not transfer at the prima facie. Okay, so that's all about rules regarding transfer of ownership. Now we have to discuss about a very important point, that is sales by non-owner. Who is an owner? A person who has a substantial control over the goods can be called owner. A person who has substantial control over the goods can be called owners. So what are the situations where a sales can be happen by a non-owner? Number one. So before that, there is a Greek sayings. Let us discuss that. Namo dat quod non habet. Namo dat quod non habet. Namo dat quod non habet, which means no one can transfer a better title than what he himself has. No one can transfer a better title than what he himself has. It means one cannot give that which he has not. Whatever you don't have, you cannot transfer. Simply I can say, if you don't have something, if you don't own something, you cannot transfer that to the third person. You don't have a right to transfer that to the third person. So if you don't have a car, how can you transfer your car to a third person? It's a question. So here comes the point of sales by non-owners. Even though you're not owner, you can transfer in some situation that we will discuss. But this maxim says that you cannot transfer the title of ownership of something unless you have that. Say you don't have a ownership of a house and you are saying I am selling this ownership or a house. It's not possible. Okay, that is the Greek maximum. Namo dat quod non habet. Now there are certain exceptional rules. What are these exceptions? Number one, sales under the title of estoppel. The word estoppel we used to discuss in our classes. So estoppel means by falsely stating that I am the owner. Say I used to say the example when a vehicle is there in the street and the police came and asked whose vehicle it is, and the police this one person said it's mine. So and later he cannot deny that. That is estoppel. So under the title of estoppel means falsely claiming the title. A person falsely claiming the title cannot deny later that he is not the owner. That is number one. Number 2, sales by mercantile agent. No need to say, there are different mercantile agents like a commission agent, brokers, factors, etc. When agent transfer of sales happens through mercantile agent, there is no problem at all. Sales by co-owners. Say there are two owners for a single property, then co-owners also can sell it. Then sale of goods obtained by voidable agreement. Say here arises a situation when one person purchased the goods from another person, and this goods was in a legal tussle where the agreement was not void agreement but voidable agreement. Say we used to have a discussions regarding the case of minor, the land of minor. Any contract by or with minor is void. That is very clearly explained in the previous classes. So it will not come under this. Say one person, suppose Mr. A purchased a land by a coercion or undue influence, or a car. Discuss about car because land will not come under the purview of Sale of Goods Act because it's not a movable goods. So a car, suppose a person purchased a car by undue influences, and this car is, he sold this car to a third person, Mr. C, suppose. Then this contract between A and B is voidable agreement, and C, he purchased it with a good faith. Then actually B is not the real owner because this agreement between A and B is voidable. So when B sell this car to Mr. C and C purchased this car with a good faith without any understanding of whether this contract is void or voidable, something like that, then that title will be transferred to the C, Mr. C. Now, sales by seller in a possession after sales, resale by seller in a possession after sales. Let us explain this with an example. Suppose you purchased an article, anything. Suppose you purchased one bucket from a shop and you kept it there. Okay, you purchased a bucket from a shop, and for convenience, if you want to have some purchase some other goods, you went to the shop, other shops. So you kept that bucket there itself. You paid the money also. But this shop owner, by mistake, sold this bucket to a third party. That is resale. Okay. So what happens? The title of the ownership actually will pass to that third person. So what about your money you paid? You can ask back the money. You have a right to ask for the damages. You don't have a right to ask for the ownership. This is something confusing, but this is very interesting also, right? Because you purchased, you paid the money also, but still, if by mistake the owner, the shopkeeper has resold that item, you cannot ask for the title because the title will go to the third person, and you can ask only for damages, and you can ask for the price and the damages. Then has some right. Sales by buyer in a possession over which the seller has some right. Sales by buyer in possession over which the seller has some right. Again, let me exemplify. Suppose the buyer has not paid the full amount, so the seller has a right to lien here. But even though suppose the goods is transferred to the buyer, and buyer sell these goods to a third person. This may happen in our daily life. Buyer, he has not paid the full amount, so the seller has a right on the goods, and the buyer selling the goods to a third person, and the third person buying the goods with good in utmost good faith. So what is the legal positions regarding in this? The legal position is the third person will get the title. Okay, that is the legal position. Then sales under provision of other acts. There are so many other acts where the seller can, and sales can happen, sales can be done even though you are not the owners. One example is under the Contract Act, if suppose the pawner and the pony, in case if they are default in payment of rent or default in payment of interest or something, the seller, the banker, suppose when you keep this pledge the goods in a bank, what will happen if you are not paying this interest amount or principal amount? They will sell your goods and they will recover the amount. Actually, they are not the owner. The ownership is not transferred to that person, but they have a right to sell the goods. So here, sales under provision of any other act, if it is permissible, that can be possible. So these are the situations under which sales can be done under non-owners. So dear students, this part is very important for even exam also. So please take care of this particular parts for exam. So wish you all the best. We will see you tomorrow with more videos. Thank you.